it came time to come up with our second speakers event that the library graciously let us use their room. I don't even know, but one night it just popped into my head. I grew up in Newport Beach before it was the OC. Now, I didn't grow up here, but I got here just in time to play volleyball on the beach on Balboa. So I feel, you know, I've been here ever since. Anyway, but I do want to thank the staff at the library and also the Arts Commission of Newport Beach, because without them we wouldn't be here, because the museum can't handle quite this many people. So anyway, this is quite a fan club that Tom Stillwell has. It's pretty exciting, I think, that all of the, it's amazing. I just met him for the first time last night, even though we've been emailing back and forth, and I thought, oh boy, there's a lot of energy and there's a lot of synergy here, so we're just getting started. Anyway, I think, I don't know if he realizes how successful he is, because if you start something in 2010 and you have 14,000 followers, I call that success. Rock star status? I don't know. But anyway, he's done a great job, and so not to talk any longer, you need to talk to the star, and so let's meet Tom.
Feeling a lot of you know me from being on the site. I'm mostly writing and pictures and that sort of thing. But let me just try to give you an idea of where I'm going with what I'm talking about to this evening. The roots of what Newport Beach is go back nearly 150 years ago. And I will try my best to kind of weave together an idea of what it is that brought us to where we are now, for better or worse. Let me tell a little bit about myself. Let's see if I can get this clicker to work. What do you think? Is it going to work? Hey, that's impressive.
White cow eating marshmallows in a snowstorm.
Look at that handsome young man. Harbor High School, 1974.
Wow.
Graduated from Harbor.
Baby.
Yes, a mere child. I did the typical route. I attended Mariners. I was saved from the horror of having the last name of Stillwell and going to Horace Anson, where the vice principal or the principal was Mr. Stillwell. My poor brother suffered through that. I was fortunate enough to end up at Carden Hall, safely ensconced from the trials and tribulations of being a Stillwell. We lived in Dover Shores, and some of you who've been on the site know that I sold my parents' house after my mother passed away, and the people who bought it, in typical fashion, tore it down.
Oh, no.
So, it's funny, it bothered me at first, but it was one of those things that I realized how many people that's happened to, and it's starting to happen where I live in Tennessee. So, you know, it's something that occurs all the time. I want you to take a moment and imagine that in 1938, Newport Beach published its first phone directory. And in that phone directory, this works so much better this afternoon. It's amazing. I think it's all the people in the room. There we go. The police department's telephone number was 1. The fire department's number was 16. Somehow, the Newport Harbor Yacht Club was 7. I'm not exactly sure how the Newport Harbor Yacht Club got in front of the fire department, but they did have a higher number. I want everybody to do something. Why don't you take your fingers and do this. Put your fingers up like that. Don't hold them together. You got to hold them slightly apart. I will contend in what I'm doing tonight that this item that's in my hand, that is now between my fingers, changed the course of this city. I'll hand this around. You don't have to worry about it. It's not, in uncirculated condition. This is a Pacific Electric that was used to ride the red car here to Newport Beach. Let me start, just literally pass it around, and please get it back to me. Now, this is the part that's the best for me, because this is when I can kind of relax for a couple minutes. This is the first of the videos. Those of you who are on the site know about the videos I've made. Those of you who have not been on the site probably don't know that I have made about 60 videos just about different aspects of life in Newport Beach. This is the one that I've always considered my favorite. I call it Old Newport. The song that you'll be hearing is Ashokan Farewell. You'll recognize it as the music that was in the Ken Burns Civil War documentary. But I think this will kind of give you a sense of the town that existed prior to World War II. So. Look at those empty hills. Never figured out why anybody would want to go to the beach in a suit. And you could buy 5 acres for $1,500. And they had terms.
But who had $1,500? That's so close to shore. They even had crowds at the beach
was the house band in the pavilion. The question is, how did we get here? How did we end up being the city we are right now? In the 1880s, the Southern Pacific Railroad reached Southern California, and the population of this area began to increase. For years, there had been Spanish ownership of the land here, and then Mexican ownership of the land. And after this became a state, some of the large tracts of land went to different developers and builders and that sort of thing. Irvine looked inward. He was a rancher. He wanted to raise cattle. McFadden brothers looked at it differently. If you look at this area of the country, Newport was one of the few natural bays that existed in this area. The biggest problem that McFadden dreamed of this becoming a place of commerce. He never envisioned the city it became. He wanted to have Balboa Island be like a factory island, and they were going to have shipworks and all these different things in it. The problem that he ran into is that entry into the bay was treacherous at best. It was very difficult to get into the bay. There were sandbars, there was no good entrance to the bay. And imagine this, at the time that he was considering this in the 1880s, it was going to cost $1.5 million to make the bay what he needed it to be. You can imagine $1.5 million is a lot of money now. Imagine how much money that was in the 1880s. That was just an impossibility. What McFadden had to do was to figure out a way to make the bay work for him as best he could. And they figured out ways to bring in very flat-bottom boats and that sort of thing. And he... No. You're supposed to go to the next picture. I don't know. What we can try is to do this. And that does nothing either. There we go. No, we don't need to see you again. You were very entertaining. But thank you. No.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, this is very important. I want you to look at this picture and take a mental image of it in your mind, because I'm going to show you something later on that's very interesting. This was McFadden's operation. He ran it out of the area he was in, essentially the Coast Highway and Dover for a number of years. In the 1880s, a bridge was finally built across the Santa Ana River, and it granted more access into this area. At that point, McFadden realized there was very little likelihood that running his operation out of that area in the bay was going to work without the dredging and other operations he needed. And so he moved his entire operation out to a wharf on the sea. Santa Ana Railroad reached Newport Beach in 1889 or 1891, and okay, now let's see, is it going to work? No. There we go. This is McFadden's Wharf. We all know it now as the Newport Pier. It was a working wharf. It was not a pleasure wharf. As you can see, it had a large expanse of railroad tracks that ran onto it. The 1890s was what one would refer to as the commercial era of Newport Beach. It was believed at that point that Newport Beach would become the harbor of Southern California. Unfortunately, circumstances kind of got in the way of that, and that distinction went to San Pedro. During that time, from the 1880s up until the turn of the century, people began to arrive in Newport Beach. Some of them, like this unknown couple, just camped on the beach. You'll be interested to know, if you see this right here, that's Lido Island, when it was a salt marsh. I've never understood this. I thought people enjoyed going to Newport. These people don't look like they're having any fun at all. But this was a tent cottages that was run by an individual at that time, and her name escapes me. Okay. This is one of the early families that was here in Newport Beach. This is Mary Frances Key and her children. And I've got this written down. Going from left to right, that is Margaret, Barbara, Mary, William, George, and Sarah. I always joked that Mary Frances is pointing to the children and saying, this is where Fashion Island is going to be. And it will ruin the view. By the turn of the 20th century, San Pedro was destined to become the harbor for this area. By that point, the population of Los Angeles had reached 100,000 people, and the hopes of McFadden pretty much faded. He basically sold his interests out, and he sold them to, and I'm going to don't totally blank on his name, William Collins. William Collins had a completely different view of what Newport Beach should be. William Collins was the man who decided this did not need to be a commercial port. This needed to be a place of recreation. And he set out to do that with the town. My notes don't match what's on here. What a surprise. Okay. Ad-lib. This is the first school. The interesting thing with us on the Newport side is there are several names of people in this that are names of people on the Newport side. Some of these are their relatives in this 1899 picture of the Newport School. As I said to you, and somebody out there has got it in their hand now, this was what changed Newport Beach.
The red car.
It was the arrival of the red car. The red car, this town was at the very end of civilization at the time that the red car arrived. And what the red car allowed people to do was to leave the Los Angeles area and be in Newport Beach in an hour, which is probably less time than it takes to go on the freeway. We began to develop a tourist industry. Renting tackle. I always loved this picture because you so rarely see people smiling in old pictures. Because the pictures had to be shot for so long, it's not possible to hold a smile. You have to kind of frown to be able to have your picture.
Except for the girl
That
on the
young
right.
lady on the right must have been pretty damn happy. She smiled as big as life.
She has a cat?
She's got a, I think she has a little dog.
Oh, dog.
Four-legged cat.
Yeah.
We ended up having a number of hotels. I'm going blank on the one, I think it's the Sharps Hotel was the first. This was the, I said the Grand Balboa Hotel. This was on the same street as the Pavilion. The Pavilion would be just up the street behind these people. Actually, my feeling is the Hotel Del Mar that was on the opposite side of the bay was really the fancy hotel. But the Hotel Balboa was a very popular place. And by this point, we were starting to have automobiles arrive in Newport Beach and just more and more people arriving. The biggest change that occurred in this city is when they began to dredge and prep the bay. People drowned regularly in the bay. There were accidents of all sorts because of sandbars and that sort of thing. And attempts were made over the years to do some dredging, but nothing of any major scale, because once again, it was extremely expensive to do. I'm sure most of you may know that Balboa Island came into existence from what they dredged out of the bottom of the bay and piled up on a sandbar. So was Lido. And if we go forward several more years, so was Shark Island, Linda Island. So a number of the islands that we think of there in the bay, they're basically the trash heaps from the dredging. You can start to see here, this is Lido. This is about the 1930s. And Lido is just starting to be developed at that point. I'm not going to take a chance of trying to go back, but if you see the previous picture, you can actually see some shallow spots that were still existing when Lido first came into existence. It was now a safe harbor. It was a harbor that could actually be used for recreational boating without any fears. In fact, they used to have speedboat races up and down the length of Newport Harbor. The big change that occurs in this town begins to occur as we approach the Second World War. It's a very popular place now. There were crowds at the beaches. At least these people were actually dressed in beach attire as opposed to suits. But this gives you an idea that yes, even in the 1930s, you had to have trouble finding a place to be at the beach. And there are probably people still looking for a parking space on Balboa Island. By the late 30s and early 40s, we really were becoming a town. This is a shot in about, I think, 1943 of the area by the Newport Pier. We still had a lot of commercial operations in Newport Beach. The recreational aspects of this town will not really occur for about another 10 years. This became a very important port once the war began, and it was a shipbuilding location. I don't know whether many of you realize, but you look at the dory fleet, this is hard to imagine, but during the entire duration of the war, the fleet was not allowed to leave the beach. All the dory fishermen had to fish off the pier. They could not take their boats out during the war. I don't know what the name of this boat is. It's called the USS PGM-7, which seems like a rather forgettable name. But this was a boat that patrolled near our area. These are some of the greatest yachts that ever existed in Newport Beach. They are, starting from one end, the Goodwill, the Pioneer, the Enchantress, the Verona, the Vegas, and the Gloria Dalton. All of these ships were pressed into service during the Second World War as shore patrol boats. They patrolled up and down the coast during the war. That'd be a really tough assignment to have to do that. I think one of the things that really begins to make you understand how Newport Beach began to change is when you look at, prior to the Second World War, there was a 15% occupancy rate during the winter months of the rental homes in this area. In the years following the war, there was a 15% vacancy rate during the war, during the winter months. And you will find that what we all know and love now as John Wayne Airport was the air base. And one of the interesting things that I never figured out until I was researching this a few days ago was why in the world did the Army Air Corps have a base that's essentially where the Sea Scout base is now? And the explanation was that most of the pilots that were being trained at Santa Ana were from places like Iowa. And most of them had no idea how to swim. And most of them were going to be sent to the Pacific. So that was where swim training occurred. And that is how it is that that area became, it was basically provided to the Army during the war. So it's fascinating to look at this. And what you come to realize is that in the years following the war, it ends up being the veterans that really start creating the town that we know now. The people that came here, the men that trained, the Marines that were down at Camp Pendleton, people who were in the Army Air Corps, the shipbuilders, everybody who was involved in that. By this point, this becomes a place to consider to live. In the early 50s, or at least in the 40s, the interior of Orange County began to grow. And people began to consider moving out into Newport Beach. So this kind of brings us up to the end of the war. And this is where what I consider, I grew up in Newport Beach before it was the OC occurs. I want to say something because on the site I've had a number of people misunderstand something. People think sometimes that I am referring to Orange County when I say the OC. I'm not referring to Orange County at all. I'm referring to a rather vacuous television show called The OC that played for a number of years that I never watched, but I can tell you, having lived in Tennessee for almost 40 years now, for the first 25 years that I lived there, if I told people I was from Newport Beach, they had absolutely no idea where I was from. They would ask me if it was near San Francisco. They would want to know if it was someplace part of San Diego or something like that. After that godforsaken television show came, I am totally serious in what I'm about to say. I had a very good friend of mine say, okay, did a lot of kids come to school in limousines? And I can remember just looking at him, just dumbfounded, and just saying, no, we rode bicycles. So, yes, unfortunately, we have become known for a pretty forgettable television show and some other reality garbage. So, here we go. Here we go. Okay, now, this is the first of these videos I ever made. I had this song kind of playing in my head, and I had all of these photographs that I didn't know what to do with that were on the site. And I'd never done a video before, so I just did this to see what it was like to do. And I think it really gives you a sense. So what do you think?
Look at this photograph. Every time I do it makes you laugh. Eyes get so red. And what the hell is on your head? This is where I grew up. I think the president fixed it up. I never knew he ever went without. The second floor's on the stage. Oh my God. This is where we went to school. Most of the time I better things to do. Criminal record says I'm broken twice. I must have done that half a dozen times.
Oh, wow.
It's too late. Should I go back and try to graduate? Life's better now than it was back then. If I was then, I wouldn't let me in.
Who put soap in that fountain? That was 4th of July, 1976. I want to say something. I want you on the side know that picture of the pavilion was an art project that my brother did in 1969. He went with a group. I don't even know who the artists were that he worked with, but they went around to different places in Newport Beach and drew pictures in the summer of 1969. That's the most iconic one of all of those. I mean, Jane, show them your shirt. We've used that all the time. To me, that just typifies Newport Beach. He did some other ones. It's just interesting to see. One of them was the China House, but it was not the China House from the bay. It was the China House from Begonia Park above it, looking down on the back of the China House. So it's fascinating to be able to see that. He's a very accomplished artist. Unfortunately, he's rather ill now and really can't do his art any longer. So, well, how do, come on, do you think?
The computer's frozen. Get your mouse off of you.
Go to the next slide. Oh, God, I love technology. Oh, good, blue. This is it. This is what started the growth of Newport Beach as we know it. It's when the Santa Ana Freeway came down. And it made it possible to, this was an advertisement trying to convince people to get memberships at the Balboa Bakery. Subdivisions began to be built. Probably the earliest, there are some earlier ones, but Bay Shores was one of the first. For subdivision. Irvine Terrace, to me, is where the next generation of subdivisions began. The East Bluffs, the Dover Shores, and that kind of stuff. This is early on when Irvine Terrace was being built. One of the problems that the city had initially is that we had to have a dependable source of water. The Irvine Company was able to set up a venture that allowed them to get water from the Colorado River to fill the Irvine Lake, and that became the reservoir that allowed a lot of the growth that occurred in the 50s and 60s in Newport Beach. Probably one of the things that put us on the map somewhat was the Boy Scout Jamboree of 1953. I've got this picture and it looks so good when I put it on there. And then when I got it, it just sort of stunk. So that's generally the Boy Scout Jamboree. I've seen a lot better pictures. It just seemed like it was a really good one. Probably could have done a better job of choosing a picture of it. But that really, again, opened up a lot of people to a knowledge of Newport Beach. Hoag Hospital was built in the, what was it, the late 40s, I believe.
Opened in 52.
52. It replaced the hospital that was at Balboa and 9th that was owned by, was it Guthrie? Grundy, yeah. The town doctor.
First doctor.
Yeah.
That's the Hoag that I remember. I remember my father missing my brother's high school graduation because he had a hernia operation. UCI. Again. I've often asked on the site, when do you feel that Newport Beach changed? And there's a lot of responses The most famous one usually is Fashion Island. Another one, people talk about Promontory Point being built. Another one is UCI. It's just certain things that really changed the complexion of the town. Ford Aerospace coming in. That was an amazing thing because when you look at the original pictures, it was surrounded by nothing. And of course, everybody's favorite, Fashion Island. Fashion Island, I remember.
Pennies.
Hard to imagine, isn't it? Now, I will make one last comment. I don't try to keep out of any kind of politics or anything of this sort. But basically, you can look at a certain point when Joan Irvine became head of the Irvine Company. She was the one that really directed the company away from its agricultural interests and more into real estate interests. So she could be viewed, wrongly or rightly, as a real driving force in changing things. So, you all experienced it. It's one of those things that I could sit here and tell you my stories, but everybody can tell you a story. You know, you realize that the people who are really into sailing, I was not really into sailing. People who were really into surfing. There's all kinds of things that people were really into. This is one of my favorite pictures. Second or third day that I had the site, I put this up and it got talked about forever. That is Will Wright's. There's the old trailer park. And it's amazing to think that we had a city that could have a trailer park like this, and across the road there could be houses like this. But that was the thing. People had this tendency to look at Newport Beach as somehow being this amazing affluent place. It wasn't like that. It wasn't that way in the 50s and 60s. People had middle-class jobs and lived in Newport Beach. These are just fun. It kind of reaches a point I could just bury you in pictures. But I try to just get certain ones. I love this. Whoops. Oh, no. Wouldn't the liability lawyers love that? And it's funny because apparently there were no railings on that when I was here, but I honestly don't remember it.
How many of us got tied on when we were little? I did, about 5 years old.
Yeah.
All around the bench. Your mom never would have done your dad.
The Fun Zone Carousel. What a shame that is gone. As I've said to certain people, it is now the unfun zone. Okay, now, remember that mental image you were supposed to have of that picture of McFadden's operation?
Yeah?
You're looking at the exact same picture.
You're kidding.
This is Shark Island. That building that you saw there was about here.
Okay.
All of this is virtually the exact spot where that photograph was taken in the 1880s. He was a little bit before Will Wright.
The other side.
I love this one. This is Paulette Pappas. She was, oh shoot, did it again. She was a ringleader. Paulette to me typifies what's sadly happening in this town.
Yeah.
Paulette now lives in Colorado. Paulette lived in Newport Beach until a few months ago. Her family had been here for decades. But she moved away because it wasn't the town that she remembered. Life was a lot easier going to Colorado. But that's Paulette and her gang. No shoes. Is that not Newport Beach before the OC? This one I love. There is a BMW dealership on Coast Highway, just up from the Arches.
Yeah.
That's where that trailer park used to be.
Oh,
Where people would come down and bring their trailers and spend time in Newport Beach at the numerous trailer parks that line the Coast Highway. See all these amazing things you're learning you never knew about this place. And then the houses, you know, there's probably a $7 million Tuscan house where that place is. Long gone. No more jam sessions in the front yard. This really says it all. It once really was like this. It's hard to imagine, but it was once like this. Surfing. God have mercy on that poor little girl.
Ford Fountain. Yes, I like that.
Did any of you have a surfboard permit? I knew there had to be one in the crowd. A lot of us can relate to these pictures. The thing that I love about this one, somebody commented that virtually none of the guys are looking at the girls, they're all looking at the waves.
Why is he not tipping them?
Things were different in the 60s, I guess. How many of you had one of these damn things?
The MI is for Midway 6.
Right. I love this one. This is a 4th of July parade at the Lido Trailer Park in about 1955, I think. Not the Newport of today, to say the least. Will Rice. The kind of place that you go see a movie and then your parents would take you for ice cream. And look at the prices there. I'm sure they still do it, but I bet they get in a lot more trouble nowadays. This was in the previous video, but to me, that picture just typifies Newport Beach in the 1970s.
No sun umbrellas, we sat in the sun.
No, and once again, the empty hills behind them. When I started the Newport site, I wrote a description trying to kind of put into it, and it says, do you remember the organist at Richards? Do you remember when the Coco's was the snack shop? And there's some other one, and a friend of mine, Pete Brown, who graduated with me at Harvard, the first day we were on it, he sent me a message and he said, do you remember skiing in the back bay? And it's interesting because a lot of people will say to me, you've done this for 7.5